Amara wiped the sweat off her forehead and adjusted the tray of plantains on her head. The sun was scorching, and her feet ached from standing all morning, but she couldn't stop now. She had a family to feed and a sick mother waiting at home. Every day, she walked through the bustling market, calling out to customers, "Sweet plantains, fresh plantains, buy from me, my brothers and sisters." Some people stopped to buy, others just walked past like she was invisible. She had been doing this for years. Since her father died, she had become the breadwinner of her family. Her mother was too weak to work, and her younger siblings were still in school. If she didn't work, they wouldn't eat. That morning, as she arranged her plantains by the roadside, a sleek black car parked nearby. Amara barely noticed. Rich people in fancy cars came to the market sometimes, but they never paid attention to people like her. Then, the door opened, and a tall man in a well-tailored suit stepped out. His shoes were polished, his watch shone in the sunlight, and his face looked like it had been carved by the gods. His presence alone made people turn their heads. Amara glanced up briefly but quickly looked away. Men like him didn't talk to girls like her. But to her surprise, he walked straight to her stall. "How much for the plantains?" his deep voice asked. Amara blinked. Was he talking to her? 500 naira per bunch," she said, still unsure if this was real. The man smiled, reaching into his pocket, but before he could pay, someone shoved past him roughly. "Move aside, rich boy," a rude man hissed. "Some of us don't have all day." Amara had learned to ignore people like that, but the rich man didn't. He turned sharply, his voice calm but cold. "Watch your mouth," he said. "Selling plantains is not a crime." The rude man took one look at his expensive suit and quickly walked away. Amara raised an eyebrow. Rich men never defended market women like her. "You didn't have to do that," she said, still studying him. "Maybe I just like standing up for hard-working people," he replied. "My name is Michael." Amara handed him the plantains. "Nice to meet you, Michael. Now, do you want more plantains, or are you just here to talk?" Michael chuckled. "Maybe both." From a distance, someone was watching them. Thomas, Amara's former admirer, clenched his fists, his eyes burning with jealousy. Years ago, he had wanted Amara for himself. He had promised her money, a good life, but she had rejected him. "You think you're too good for me?" Thomas had sneered when she turned him down. "I don't love you, Thomas. Please stop following me," Amara had told him. He had never forgotten those words, and now watching her smile at another man, his blood boiled. "So you rejected me, but now you're smiling at this rich fool," he muttered. His hands tightened into fists. "If I can't have you, no one will." The next morning, Amara was back in the market, arranging her plantains neatly on the wooden stand. The market was already buzzing with activity. Women calling out their goods, men bargaining loudly, and children running around barefoot. Amara was used to it all. But today, something felt different. She couldn't stop thinking about Michael. Why had a man like that stopped at her stall? Rich men only shopped in air-conditioned supermarkets, not in dusty markets like this. And the way he had defended her yesterday, it was strange. No one had ever stood up for her like that. She shook her head and focused on her work. Rich men like that don't come back. Just then, a man walked up to her stall. His clothes were worn, and his eyes darted around suspiciously. "How much for this bunch?" he asked, pointing at a big set of plantains. 600 naira, Amara said firmly. The man scoffed. "I beg, I will pay 300. Amara sighed. "I can't sell it for that price. It's fresh and big. You can take a smaller one for 300. The man's face hardened. What nonsense! Other sellers are selling it cheaper. You think you're better than them? Amara crossed her arms. Then buy from them. The man hissed. You are too proud. Who do you think you are? Before Amara could respond, a familiar deep voice cut in. She told you the price. Pay or leave. Amara's heart skipped. She turned and saw Michael, standing there in another crisp suit, hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. The rude man looked at Michael's expensive clothes and stepped back. Big man, face your business, he grumbled before walking away. Amara sighed. I could have handled that, you know. Michael smirked. I know, but it was fun to watch. Amara eyed him. Why are you here again? Do you love plantains that much? Michael chuckled. Maybe. He took out his wallet. Give me 2 bunches. Amara wrapped the plantains and handed them over. 1,200 naira. Michael handed her 5,000 naira. Amara frowned. I don't have change for this. Keep it, he said casually. She stared at him. Number, I don't take free money. Michael raised an eyebrow. She was different. Most people would have grabbed the extra cash without a second thought, but Amara refused. He smiled and took back the money, handing her the exact amount instead. Fair enough, but I'll be back tomorrow. Amara shook her head. Do you even cook? Michael laughed. Maybe I just like plantains. As he turned to leave, Thomas watched from a distance, his fists clenched. Michael sat in his office, staring at his phone. Why was he thinking about a plantain seller? His friend, David, sat across from him, sipping whiskey. So, let me get this straight, David said, smirking. You went back to the market for a plantain seller. Michael sighed. She's not just a plantain seller. She's smart and hard-working. David laughed. My guy, don't fall for a street girl. Girls like that will act innocent and later trap you. Next thing, she's asking for money, rent, school fees, and before you know it, you're stuck. Michael frowned. She refused my money. David scoffed and shook his head. Typical of girls like that. They pretend like they don't like money, so you will think they are good girls, and bam, you are sucked dry. Before you know it, she is asking for half your assets. He took another sip of his drink and leaned back. My brother, shine your eyes. That no worth 'em. Michael smirked. I tried to give her extra and she rejected it, said she doesn't take free money. David sat up. Wait, what? Michael smirked. I know, right? She's different. David shook his head. Still, be careful. You're a billionaire, Michael. She's a nobody. If you're not careful, people will talk. Michael smiled slightly. Let them talk. For the first time in a long while, he was curious about someone, and he was going to find out more about Amara. Michael wasn't sure why he kept going back to the market. Maybe it was the fresh air, the lively sounds of traders haggling, or the sight of hard-working people making an honest living. Or maybe, just maybe, it had something to do with Amara. He found himself returning to her stall almost every other day, always finding an excuse to buy plantains, even when he knew he wouldn't cook them. Back again? Amara asked, raising an eyebrow when she saw him one morning. Michael smiled. What can I say? Your plantains are the best. Amara smirked. Or maybe you just enjoy buying plantains you'll never cook. Michael chuckled, impressed by her sharpness. Maybe. He handed her the money for another bunch and watched as she packed it up. Amara noticed how he always seemed relaxed when he was here, different from how rich men usually behaved, like they were doing the world a favor by existing. But still, she kept a respectful distance. Rich men had a way of making promises they didn't keep. She had seen it before, powerful men who acted nice, only to turn cold when they didn't get what they wanted. "I should go," she said, handing him the bag. "Thanks for your patronage." Michael studied her for a moment. She wasn't like most women he met. She didn't try to impress him, and she never acted desperate. If anything, she treated him like just another customer. And for some reason, that only made him more interested. "I'll see you around," he said, taking the bag and walking away. Not far away, Thomas stood with his arms crossed, his face dark with anger. Amara was smiling at another man, a rich man. The sight made his blood boil. He had loved Amara once, at least that's what he told himself. He had wanted to take care of her, to give her a better life, but she had humiliated him, turning him down like he was nothing. "You think you're too good for me?" he had said the day she rejected him. "I don't love you, Thomas. Please stop following me," she had told him. Those words had burned, but now, here she was, entertaining some rich fool. So she rejected me, but now she's smiling at him? Thomas clenched his fists. "If I can't have you, no one will," he muttered. He turned away, his mind already working on a plan. If Michael thought he could take Amara from him, he was wrong. Michael sat in his office, staring at the bunch of plantains on his table. He sighed. What am I doing? He never wasted time on women. He was always too busy, too focused on work. But there was something about Amara, something that made him feel different. She wasn't after his money. She wasn't desperate for his attention, and that made him want her even more. He leaned back in his chair and picked up his phone. Tomorrow, he was going back to the market, and this time, he wasn't just going to buy plantains. He was going to get to know Amara. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the busy market. Traders packed up their goods, while late customers rushed to make their last purchases. Amara was arranging the remaining plantains when she heard that now familiar voice. "You know, at this rate, I'll start believing you're avoiding me." She turned and saw Michael, standing with his hands in his pockets, that usual confident smirk on his face. She rolled her eyes playfully. "You again? Don't you have somewhere important to be?" Michael chuckled. "Nowhere more important than here." Amara shook her head, placing her hands on her hips. "Be honest, Michael. Are you really here for plantains, or do you just enjoy disturbing me?" Michael grinned. "Both." Amara let out a small laugh. "At least you're honest." Michael's expression turned more serious. He looked at her stall, the way she carefully handled her goods, the determination in her eyes. "I admire your hard work, Amara," he said. She paused, looking at him curiously. "Why are you telling me this?" Michael exhaled and leaned against the wooden stall. "I see how much effort you put into this. I know it's not easy. That's why I want to help you." Amara frowned slightly. "Help me? How?" Michael straightened up. "I want to give you a shop, a real store where you can sell your plantains, and maybe other things too. You won't have to stand under the sun all day." For a moment, Amara didn't speak. Then she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Michael, I appreciate the thought, but I don't take handouts." Michael blinked, surprised. "It's not a handout, Amara. It's an opportunity." She crossed her arms. "An opportunity that I didn't ask for." Michael sighed. He had expected her to be happy, maybe even excited, but instead, she was rejecting his help. "Why?" he asked. Amara looked at him directly. "Because I work for what I have. Everything I've built, I did it with my own hands. I don't want anything handed to me just because some rich man thinks I deserve it. Michael was silent for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. You're really something else, Amara. She raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? Yes. Most people would have jumped at my offer without thinking twice. Amara smiled. Well, I'm not most people. Michael chuckled. That's what I like about you. He studied her face for a moment. Her eyes were strong, determined, full of fire. He wasn't going to push her. But he wasn't going to give up either. All right, he said. No handouts. But what if I earn your trust first? Amara narrowed her eyes. And how do you plan to do that? Michael smirked. You'll see. Before she could respond, he took his plantains and walked away, leaving her staring after him. For the first time, Amara felt something strange in her heart. Something she wasn't ready to admit just yet. The night was quiet, but Amara couldn't sleep. She sat beside her mother's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. Mama had gotten worse. Her breathing was weaker, and her body felt colder than usual. Every few minutes she would cough, her frail body shaking with the effort. Amara swallowed the lump in her throat and held her mother's hand. Mama, you need to eat. Let me get you some food. Her mother weakly shook her head. I'm not hungry, my daughter. Just sit with me. Amara blinked back tears and squeezed her hand. You'll get better, Mama. I promise. But deep inside, she was scared. The doctor had already told her the only way to save her mother was surgery, and it wasn't cheap. 500,000 naira. It was money she didn't have. She had been trying to save, working harder, but the bills were piling up too fast. Amara dragged herself to the market the next morning, her heart heavy. Her usual bright energy was gone. She barely called out to customers. Her body was there, but her mind was far away. Michael noticed immediately. He had come as usual to buy plantains he didn't need. But today, when he saw Amara's tired face, her red eyes, and the way she barely smiled, he knew something was wrong. Amara, he said softly. What's wrong? She shook her head quickly. Nothing. Just tired. Michael wasn't convinced. You can tell me. Amara looked away. I'm fine, Michael. Michael studied her carefully. He had seen this look before. The look of someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear, and he wasn't going to ignore it. Michael made a few calls. He didn't need to know all the details. He just needed to help. By the next morning, the payment for Amara's mother's surgery was settled. The hospital called Amara to inform her, but she was confused. What do you mean someone paid? She asked, gripping the phone. Yes, madam. An anonymous donor cleared the entire bill, the nurse replied cheerfully. Amara's hands shook. Are you sure? Maybe this is a mistake. No mistake, madam. Your mother's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. Amara dropped the phone, her heart pounding. Who could have done this? There was only one person she could think of. Michael. The moment Michael stepped into the market that day, Amara was waiting for him. She stormed up to him, her eyes burning with emotions. You did it, didn't you? She demanded. Michael frowned. Did what? Don't act like you don't know, she snapped. The hospital bills, the surgery, you paid for everything. Michael sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Amara. Why? Her voice softened, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Why would you do that? Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. Because I could. Amara's breath hitched. He had done something so huge, without even telling her, without asking for anything in return. Torn between gratitude and pride, she shook her head. Michael, I didn't ask for this. I know, he said quietly. But you needed help. Amara bit her lip, feeling overwhelmed. Nobody had ever done something like this for her before. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to tell him she didn't need a rich man to save her. But the truth was, she did need help. And Michael had given it without asking for anything back. Her walls were crumbling, and for the first time she didn't want to fight it. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Michael reached out and gently wiped one away with his thumb. Just say yes. Amara's lips trembled. Yes to what? Yes to trusting me, he whispered. She looked into his eyes, and in that moment, she knew Michael wasn't like other men. She nodded slowly, and for the first time, she let her heart open just a little. Thomas sat at a small roadside bar, gripping his glass of beer tightly. His eyes burned with anger as he listened to the latest gossip. Everyone in the market was talking about Amara and her new rich admirer, Michael. Some women were saying Amara was lucky. Some men were saying she was smart. But to Thomas, she was nothing but a traitor. She rejected me for him, he muttered, slamming his glass on the table. His friend Kunle chuckled. That's life, my guy. You no get money, another man go collect your babe. Thomas's jaw tightened. Number. It wasn't about money. It was about revenge. He had loved Amara first. He had wanted to take care of her, but she had looked him in the eye and told him no. Now she was entertaining some billionaire like a queen. She had to pay. The next morning, Thomas walked into the market with a wicked plan. He found Mr. Patrick, a greedy market official who could be bought for the right price. Slipping a thick bundle of cash into the man's hands, Thomas leaned in and whispered, "Shut down Amara's stall." Mr. Patrick's eyes widened. On what grounds? Thomas smirked. Make something up. A few hours later, as Amara was busy arranging her plantains, a group of market officials stormed her stall. Madam, your goods have been reported for being rotten and unfit for sale. Amara's heart dropped. What? That's not true. I sell only fresh plantains. The officials ignored her and began sealing off her stall, hanging a sign that read, Business closed due to unhealthy products. A crowd gathered, murmuring in shock. She looked too lucky these days, someone whispered. I knew it. No wonder she suddenly became popular, another person said. Amara felt humiliated. She turned to Mr. Patrick. Please, sir, this is a mistake. I can prove my plantains are fresh. But Mr. Patrick just smirked. You can take it up with the market board. Until then, your stall stays closed. Tears burned Amara's eyes as she watched her only source of income taken from her. From a distance, Thomas watched and smirked. Now, let's see how you survive without your rich boyfriend's money. Later that evening, Amara sat outside her mother's house, staring at the ground. The pain in her chest was unbearable. She had worked so hard to build her business, and now it was gone, just like that. She was tired, so tired. She didn't even notice Michael's car pull up until he stepped out. Amara, he said gently. What happened? She sighed, shaking her head. They closed my stall. They said I was selling rotten plantains, but Michael, you know that's not true. Michael's eyes darkened. Who did this? Amara shrugged. I don't know, but I have a feeling. Michael clenched his jaw. Thomas. Amara didn't respond, but they both knew the truth. Michael crouched in front of her, lifting her chin with his fingers. Amara, listen to me. This is not the end. Tears filled her eyes. Michael, I don't have anything left. Yes, you do, he said firmly. You have me. Amara's lips trembled. But I don't want to depend on you. Michael smiled softly. You're not. You're depending on yourself. I'm just making sure you get what you deserve. She sniffed. What do you mean? Michael stood up. Come with me. Michael drove Amara across town to a better location, one where rich customers shopped. They stopped in front of a small but beautiful shop with large glass windows. Amara's eyes widened. Michael, what is this? He turned to her. Your new store. She gasped. Number I told you. Michael held up a hand. Relax. I'm not giving it to you for free. I'm investing in you. Amara frowned. Investing? Michael nodded. This is a loan. You'll pay me back when your business grows. No strings attached. Amara stared at him, speechless. This man, he actually believed in her. Michael, I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said with a small smile. She exhaled, her heart full. Yes. A few weeks later, Amara's new store, Golden Plantain, was the talk of the town. Rich and middle-class customers flooded in. She expanded her business, selling plantain chips, plantain flour, and even roasted plantain with sauce. Her name became known beyond the market. And Thomas? He could only watch in anger as Amara rose even higher than before. Amara stood behind the counter of Golden Plantain, arranging the freshly fried plantain chips into small, neatly sealed packs. The sweet aroma filled the air, drawing in more customers by the day. Her business was growing faster than she ever imagined. Michael had kept his word. The loan he gave her had set her up for success, but it was her own hard work and dedication that made the store flourish. Every morning, Michael would stop by before heading to his office. Checking if I'm running your investment well? Amara teased one afternoon as she handed him a pack of spicy plantain chips. Michael chuckled, leaning on the counter. Something like that. But mostly, I just enjoy seeing you. Amara rolled her eyes playfully, but inside her heart fluttered. He was always there, supporting, encouraging, making her laugh. And the more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the way she felt. She was falling for him. That evening, after closing the shop, Amara and Michael sat outside watching the sunset. For the first time, Michael looked different, quieter, distant. Michael, Amara said softly, what's wrong? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Do you know why my mother is always so controlling? Amara shook her head. Michael exhaled. A few years ago, I fell in love. Her name was Tasha. Amara's chest tightened. He had loved someone before. Michael continued, his voice lower. I thought she loved me too. She made me feel special, until I found out she was only with me for my money. Amara's eyes widened. What happened? Michael let out a bitter chuckle. She convinced me to buy her a house, a car, even helped her start a business. She promised we would get married. He paused, looking away. One day, I found out she was engaged to another man the whole time. Amara gasped. She betrayed you. Michael nodded. She used me. My mother tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. After that, I told myself I'd never let another woman in. I focused on work and shut everyone out. He turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. But then I met you. Amara's heart raced. I don't know what it is about you, Amara, Michael admitted. You're different. You never asked me for anything. You don't care about my money, and every time I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time." Amara swallowed hard. Michael leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm falling for you." She could barely breathe. He was rich, powerful, and could have any woman he wanted. But here he was, vulnerable, telling her his deepest fears. Amara reached for his hand, holding it gently. "Michael, I am not Tasha. I will never hurt you." Michael studied her face, searching for any sign of a lie, but all he saw was truth. Slowly, he reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. And then, before she could think, before she could doubt, his lips brushed against hers. It was soft at first, hesitant, then deeper. A slow, warm kiss that sent shivers down Amara's spine. When they finally pulled apart, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "I think I'm falling for you too." Michael smiled. "Then let's not fight it." And just like that, everything changed. They were no longer just two people from different worlds. They were something more. Madame Rosalind Adderwile was not a woman to be disrespected. She was powerful, wealthy, and feared in high society. Her friends often joked that she could control the stock market with just one phone call. So when news reached her that her only son, Michael, was getting serious with a plantain seller, she nearly spilled her expensive wine. "A what?" she repeated, staring at her friend, Mrs. Williams, who had just given her the gossip. The older woman sipped her tea with a smug look. "A plantain seller, Rosaline. Can you imagine? Your son, a billionaire, dating a girl from the streets." Madame Rosalind's jaw tightened. This was impossible. Michael had promised never to let a woman fool him again after what happened with Tasha. And now, a common market girl had trapped him. Not while she was alive. She set down her glass, picked up her handbag, and rose to her feet. "Where are you going?" Mrs. Williams asked. Madame Rosaline's eyes darkened. "To handle this nonsense before it goes too far." Amara was busy at the shop when a black Mercedes pulled up in front of the store. She barely looked up. She had seen many expensive cars ever since her business grew. But when the door opened and a tall, elegant woman stepped out, wearing a fitted designer dress, diamond earrings, and an air of authority, the entire atmosphere changed. Whispers filled the shop as customers stepped aside. Even Amara's workers froze in fear. Amara wiped her hands and walked toward the woman, who was now staring at her like she was an insect. "Good afternoon, Ma," Amara greeted politely. Madame Rosaline looked her up and down, her eyes filled with disgust. "So, you're the one," she said coldly. Amara frowned slightly. "Excuse me?" Madame Rosaline's lips curled. "The one who has been fooling my son. I should have known you would be beautiful. That's how women like you trap men." A few people gasped. Amara stiffened. "I don't understand, Ma." "Oh, don't act innocent," Madame Rosaline snapped. "I know your type. A poor girl looking for a rich man to rescue her from poverty. You act humble, refuse gifts at first, just to make him think you are different. But in the end, you all want one thing: money." Amara felt a lump in her throat. She had heard insults before, but this was different. This was Michael's mother. "Ma, with all due respect, I never asked Michael for anything." Madame Rosaline laughed bitterly. "Oh, I know. But it's only a matter of time. Before I know it, you will be pregnant, demanding half of his wealth." Amara's heart shattered. This woman, she didn't even know her. But no matter what she said, Amara refused to fight, because love cannot be forced. She swallowed her pride and said softly, "I love your son, Ma." Madame Rosaline's eyes flashed with anger. "Then prove it," she hissed. Amara blinked. "What?" "Leave him. If you really love him, you will let him go. A woman like you will only bring shame to him." Amara felt like she had been slapped. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to cry. After a long moment, she took a deep breath and nodded. "If that's what will make him happy, I will leave," Amara whispered. Madame Rosaline smirked. "Smart girl." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Amara standing alone, heartbroken. That night, Michael walked into Golden Plantain, expecting to see Amara's usual bright smile. Instead, he found her sitting alone, staring at nothing. His heart sank. "Amara," he said gently. She looked up, her eyes red. Michael frowned. "What's wrong?" Amara swallowed hard. "Michael, we can't be together." Michael froze. "What?" Amara looked away. "Your mother came to see me today." Michael's jaw tightened. "What did she say to you?" Amara bit her lip, forcing back tears. "She said I'm not good enough for you, that I'll ruin your reputation." Michael felt rage burn inside him. "She told me to prove my love by leaving you," Amara continued. "So I'm leaving." Michael grabbed her hands. "No." His voice was firm. "You're not leaving." "Michael!" He cupped her face, his eyes filled with anger and love. "My mother doesn't control my life," he whispered. "You do." Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks. "But she's your family." Michael exhaled sharply. "And you're the woman I love." Amara's heart stopped. Michael stared deep into her eyes. "You love me too, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Michael pulled her into his arms. "Then nothing else matters." As Michael held Amara, someone was watching. Thomas. He clenched his fists as he saw them wrapped in each other's arms. So she rejected him, but she was ready to fight for Michael. His eyes burned with hatred. If Amara thought she had won, she was wrong, because he wasn't finished with her yet. Michael stormed into his mother's mansion that evening, his jaw clenched in anger. "Mother, what did you say to Amara?" he demanded as he walked into the grand living room. Madame Rosaline Adderwell sat elegantly on a velvet couch, sipping from a glass of wine like she had no care in the world. She barely looked up as she replied, "I did what any good mother would do." Michael's fists tightened. "You had no right." Rosaline finally set down her glass and met her son's furious gaze. "I had every right. I am your mother, Michael, and I will not sit by and watch you throw your future away on a market girl." Michael's chest tightened. "She is not just a market girl. She is the woman I love." Rosaline's face hardened. "You think love is enough? Do you know how much damage this will do to your reputation, to the family name? Michael, you are a billionaire. You have businesses to run, social standards to maintain. You cannot marry a plantain seller." Michael exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't care about social standards. Amara is hardworking, honest, and kind. She's everything I've ever wanted in a woman." Rosaline's lips curled. "Oh, please. You sound like a fool. Have you forgotten Tasha already? How she used you? You think Amara is different. These poor girls always pretend until they get what they want." Michael's jaw tightened. "Amara is nothing like Tasha. She never asked me for a thing." Rosaline stood up and walked toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Fine. If you're so sure she's different, then choose." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" Rosaline folded her arms. It's simple, son. If you marry Amara, you are no longer my son. Michael froze. What? Rosalind's voice was cold. I will cut you off. No inheritance, no family business, no support. You will lose everything you've built with me. Michael's heart pounded. He had expected his mother's disapproval, but this? She was really willing to disown him over this. He stared at her, searching for any sign of softness, but there was none. Rosalind meant every word. Michael took a slow, deep breath. You would really do this to your own son? Rosalind's eyes didn't waver. I am doing this for my son. Michael let out a bitter chuckle. Number, you're doing this for yourself, for your ego. You think money is everything, but it's not. Rosalind narrowed her eyes. If money is not everything, then walk away from it. Choose her. Let's see how far love takes you without wealth. Michael's fists clenched. I don't need your money, mother, and I won't leave Amara. Rosalind smirked. Let's see if she feels the same way. Michael's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Rosalind picked up her glass again. You'll see soon enough. Amara sat in her shop, staring blankly at the counter. Her heart was heavy. After Michael left last night, she had cried for hours. She loved him, more than she ever thought possible. But his mother, Madame Rosaline, would never accept her. And now, the whole world would know she was the poor girl who wanted to marry a billionaire. Her mother sat beside her, watching her daughter closely. Amara, what's wrong? Amara sniffed, trying to hold back her tears. Mama, I don't think I can be with Michael anymore. Her mother frowned. Why? Amara wiped her eyes. His mother will never accept me. She threatened to cut him off if he chooses me. Her mother's expression softened. And what did Michael say? Amara let out a shaky breath. He said he doesn't care about the money, but Mama, I don't want to be the reason he loses everything. Her mother sighed. Amara, let me ask you something. Do you love him? Amara swallowed and nodded. With all my heart. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. Then trust him. Trust his love for you. Amara shook her head. It's not that simple. Love is not enough. He will resent me when he realizes he gave up his life for a poor girl. Her mother sighed. So, what will you do? Amara's heart broke as she whispered, I will leave him before he has to choose. Michael walked into Golden Plantain, expecting to see Amara's warm smile. Instead, she stood stiffly behind the counter, her face unreadable. Hey, he said softly, stepping toward her. She didn't smile. Michael's chest tightened. Amara? What's wrong? She took a deep breath. Michael, we need to talk. He froze. Her voice sounded so cold. What is it? He asked cautiously. Amara looked him in the eyes, and for a moment, he saw her pain. Then she looked away. I can't do this anymore, she said quietly. Michael's heart stopped. What? Amara took a shaky breath. Your mother is right. We don't belong together. I don't fit into your world. Michael's chest tightened. Amara, don't do this. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I have to. Michael stepped forward. No, you don't. We can fight this together. Amara's lips trembled, but she steeled herself. I don't want to fight, Michael. Michael's breath hitched. This isn't you talking, he whispered. It's my mother, isn't it? Amara swallowed hard. It doesn't matter. Michael's hands clenched into fists. So you're just Giving up? Amara's eyes filled with tears. I'm doing this for you. You'll understand one day. Michael shook his head. Number, I'll never understand. Because I know one thing. I love you, Amara. And I know you love me too. Amara closed her eyes, trying to hold back the pain. She wanted to run into his arms. She wanted to tell him the truth. But instead, she whispered, "Goodbye, Michael." And with that, she turned away, unable to watch the heartbreak on his face. Michael stood frozen, feeling like the air had been knocked out of him. He had fought for love before and lost. But this time, he wasn't giving up. Not yet. Michael sat in his office, staring blankly at his desk. The breakup had drained every bit of strength from him. He had lost Amara, not because she didn't love him, but because his mother's selfishness had forced her away. Michael had tried calling, texting. Nothing. She had completely shut him out. Just when he was about to drown in frustration, his office door opened and his father, Chief Adewale, walked in. Michael sighed, rubbing his temple. "Dad, if you're here to talk about Mother." His father raised a hand. "I already know what happened." Michael exhaled. "Then you should also know I'm not giving up on Amara." His father studied him for a moment before sighing. "Tell me something, son. Do you really love this girl?" Michael met his father's gaze without hesitation. "With everything in me." Chief Adewale nodded. "Then maybe it's time your mother hears the truth about our past." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" His father smiled slightly. "Your mother and I were once just like you and Amara." That evening, Chief Adewale walked into the mansion where Madame Rosaline sat in the lounge, sipping her usual glass of wine. She didn't look up when he entered. "If you're here to lecture me, save your breath." Chief Adewale sat across from her, his expression calm but serious. "Rosaline, do you remember Margaret?" At the mention of the name, her fingers froze around the wine glass. Her eyes flickered for a second before she quickly masked it. "What about her?" Chief Adewale leaned forward. "She was your best friend, wasn't she?" Rosaline's grip tightened. "That was a long time ago." "Yes," Chief Adewale said softly. "And do you remember why you lost contact?" Rosaline's throat tightened. Margaret had been her closest friend during their youth. They had grown up poor together, struggling, dreaming of a better life. But when Rosaline married Chief Adewale and stepped into wealth, she had cut off her old life, including Margaret. Chief Adewale continued, "I never agreed with how you abandoned her. She was like a sister to you." Rosaline stiffened. "Why are you bringing this up now?" Chief Adewale sighed. "Because Margaret is Amara's mother." The room fell silent. Rosaline froze, her heart pounding in disbelief. "What?" Her husband nodded. "That Plantain seller you look down on. She is the daughter of the woman who once stood by you when you had nothing." Rosaline's breath hitched. Memories flooded her mind. Margaret lending her money for food, helping her sew dresses, cheering her on when she had no hope. And she had abandoned her. Rosaline slowly set down her glass, feeling a mix of shame and shock. Chief Adewale's voice was gentle but firm. "Amara is not a gold digger, Rosaline. She is her mother's daughter, strong, hard-working and pure-hearted, just like Margaret." Rosaline swallowed hard, feeling something inside her shift. Had she really been so blinded by status that she had forgotten where she came from? The next morning, Amara was arranging plantains when a black Mercedes pulled up outside her shop. She froze. Madame Rosaline stepped out, dressed elegantly as always. but something about her seemed different. The crowd watched in shock as she walked straight toward Amara. Amara tensed. Madame Rosalind. Rosalind studied her for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath. I was wrong about you. Amara's heart pounded. I judged you without knowing who you truly were, Rosalind continued, her voice softer than before, and I deeply regret that. Amara swallowed. Madam, Rosalind raised a hand. Let me finish. She glanced around at the market, at the people watching. I once sold things in a place like this. Amara's eyes widened. Rosalind exhaled. I came from nothing. I worked hard, just like you. And yet, I treated you like you weren't good enough for my son. Amara's throat tightened. Rosalind's voice wavered slightly. But the truth is, you are more than good enough. Amara felt tears sting her eyes. Rosalind stepped closer. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know. You have my blessing. Gasps filled the air. Amara covered her mouth in shock. Madame Rosalind, giving her blessing. Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks as she whispered, Thank you. Rosalind gave her a small nod, then glanced toward the side. Michael was standing there. His face was unreadable, but his eyes shone with emotion. Michael, Rosalind said, turning to him, go and get your woman. Michael didn't need to be told twice. He strode toward Amara, cupping her face with both hands. Are you sure? He whispered. Amara nodded quickly, her tears flowing freely. I love you, Michael. Michael let out a shaky breath before pulling her into a deep, soulful kiss. The crowd erupted into cheers. Even Madame Rosalind let out a small smile. She had fought against this love, but now she saw the truth. Love wasn't about class or wealth. It was about finding the one person you couldn't live without. And Michael had found his. Love is not about wealth. It's about finding someone who believes in you when the world doubts you. Amara sat in her shop, still trying to process everything that had happened. A few days ago, she had walked away from the man she loved. And now? His mother, the same woman who had sworn she would never accept her, had given them her blessing. It felt like a dream. She touched her lips, remembering the way Michael had kissed her in front of the entire market. He chose her. Despite the pressure, despite his family's wealth, despite society's expectations, he had chosen her, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. She loved him. And now, nothing stood in their way. The next evening, Michael took Amara on a special date. She didn't know what he was planning, but as they arrived at an elegant rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, her breath caught. The place was beautiful. Golden light sparkled around them, and the night sky stretched endlessly above. Soft music played in the background, and a private table was set up in the center, surrounded by glowing candles. Michael, she whispered, turning to him. This is incredible. Michael smiled. Only the best for my queen. They sat, talked, and laughed, just like they always did. But as dessert was being served, Michael suddenly stood up. Amara, he said, his voice serious now. She looked up, confused. Yes? Then, right before her eyes, he dropped to one knee. Amara's heart stopped. Gasps and soft whispers filled the air as other guests watched. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a stunning diamond ring. From the moment I met you, I knew you were special, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I never expected to fall in love with a woman who sold plantains, but here I am, unable to imagine my life without you. Tears filled Amara's eyes. I love you, Michael continued. Not because of what you have or where you come from, but because of who you are. Your strength, your heart, your fire. Everything about you makes me a better man. Amara let out a shaky breath. Michael smiled softly. So I'm asking you, Amara Okafor, will you make me the luckiest man alive and be my wife? Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. Then she nodded rapidly. Yes, she whispered. Michael grinned. I didn't hear that. She let out a soft laugh, her voice trembling. Yes, Michael, yes! Cheers erupted around them as Michael slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing softly into his chest. This was real. This was their happy ending. 2 months later, the wedding of Michael and Amara became the event of the year. The once skeptical high society elites whispered in shock as the simple market girl they had laughed at walked down the aisle in an elegant designer gown. Her beauty was undeniable. Her presence, regal. But most importantly, her love was pure. Madame Rosaline, who had once fought against this union, now stood proudly as she watched her son marry the woman who had changed his life. Michael's father stood beside her, smiling warmly. As the priest spoke, Michael held Amara's hands tightly, his eyes shining. I, Michael Adewale, take you, Amara Okafor, to be my wife. In wealth or struggle, in joy or sorrow, I choose you, now and forever. Amara swallowed back her tears. I, Amara Okafor, take you, Michael Adewale, to be my husband. No matter what comes, no matter who stands against us, I will always stand by your side. The priest smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Michael didn't wait. He pulled Amara close and kissed her deeply, sealing their love before the world. The crowd cheered. Tears filled Madame Rosaline's eyes. Even Thomas, watching from afar, knew in that moment he had lost. Love had won. And as Amara and Michael walked hand in hand, stepping into their future, one thing was clear. Some love stories are worth fighting for.